You think I don't see it, don't you? I whispered to myself as I walked into the dining room, the afternoon sunlight spilling across the polished oak table. The silverware gleamed, the napkins folded perfectly, but my attention was elsewhere, on Vanessa, my son Michael's new wife, moving through the room with a calculated grace, smiling at the guests while leaving me in a subtle shadow. I set down the tray of appetizers I had prepared and paused, my fingers brushing the edge of the china plate, noticing the way she leaned just slightly too close when she handed Michael his drink, her eyes flickering toward me with a half-smile that carried something cold. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay composed, to observe quietly, because I had learned early that confrontation too soon would only make her stronger. The air felt heavy with expectation, yet no one seemed aware of the tension simmering just beneath my calm exterior. I remembered the past few months, how invitations had arrived at the last minute, how certain family events had conveniently been scheduled when I was busy, how small remarks had chipped away at my confidence without me even realizing it first. Each memory fit into a pattern, each small slight building into a larger picture I could no longer ignore. I walked slowly past the fireplace, noting the photograph of our family from last Christmas, a reminder of better times. And yet even that memory was tinged with the awareness that things were changing, that Vanessa's influence over Michael was growing. I kept my head high, my hands steady, pretending the scene was ordinary, but inside, I cataloged every word, every glance, every gesture. I poured myself a glass of water and took a careful sip, letting the cool liquid steady my pulse. And as I set the glass down, I realized the first step would be patience, watching, learning, and gathering evidence of the quiet manipulations that had been so carefully hidden. Guests laughed and talked around us, the clinking of glasses and soft music forming a background that contrasted sharply with the sharp focus I maintained, every detail of Vanessa's movements and Michael's distracted nods recorded in my mind. I reminded myself that outward calm was my ally, that the perception of composure would mask the storm that was quietly forming, that she did not yet know I was aware, and that awareness alone gave me a quiet advantage. My eyes drifted to the centerpiece of fresh lilies, the scent mingling with the aroma of roasted chicken and garlic mashed potatoes, and I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile at the irony that such beauty could coexist with deception, that the family I had nurtured now stood on a fragile threshold of revelation. I turned back to Vanessa, noting her precise movements, the way she adjusted her dress, the subtle lift of her chin, the micro-expressions that revealed intentions she thought were hidden. I reminded myself of the power of observation, the weight of patience, and the inevitability of consequences when someone believes they are untouchable. I felt the first ripple of anticipation, knowing the moment would come when the quiet attention I had given would become the leverage I needed, that the calm of the present was the foundation for the storm to follow, and that by the time anyone realized what was unfolding, the advantage would belong entirely to me, Helen Parker, the mother who had long observed, long endured, and now finally understood. I returned to the kitchen after serving the guests, my hands brushing the edge of the counter as I collected the empty plates. The room hummed with conversation, the clinking of silverware and soft murmur of laughter, but I felt the emptiness around me, the subtle isolation that had crept in over the past months. Michael moved through the space, occasionally glancing at me with a polite nod, his attention drawn always back to Vanessa, who carried herself with a quiet authority, placing her hand briefly on his arm as if to claim the room for herself. I poured a glass of water and took a measured sip, letting the cool liquid anchor me as my mind wandered to the small patterns that had emerged, the sudden changes in scheduling, the last-minute invitations, the way she would redirect conversations away from me, the way she subtly altered plans so that I would not be included. Each detail, minor on its own, now formed a lattice of intention that I could no longer dismiss as coincidence. I adjusted a napkin on the counter, noting how Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me and quickly looked away, a practiced avoidance that revealed far more than she intended. I reminded myself to breathe, to maintain composure, to observe without interruption, because the strength of the situation lay in patience, in silent gathering of understanding. My gaze drifted to the framed photograph of Michael at his graduation, standing beside Vanessa with a smile that now seemed layered with deception. I allowed myself a slow, deliberate sigh, not of frustration but of focus, knowing that awareness was my first advantage. In the corner of the room, the centerpiece of fresh tulips reached toward the ceiling, vibrant and alive, contrasting with the weight of the subtle manipulations that pervaded the space. I moved toward the refrigerator, opening the door to retrieve another glass of water, each step deliberate, careful, maintaining a rhythm that belied the careful calculations running through my mind. I remembered the words of an old friend, quietly warning me to watch, to record, to notice the small shifts that reveal intention. And now, each gesture, each smile, each carefully placed word from Vanessa became evidence in my observation, each one feeding the growing clarity of understanding. I placed the glass on the counter and straightened, noticing the slight tension in Michael's posture, the way he unconsciously adjusted his tie whenever Vanessa's gaze lingered. I felt a quiet resolve building, a patience sharpened over decades, honed by awareness of the subtle currents of influence that could otherwise go unnoticed. The sunlight moved slowly across the floor, illuminating the tiny details, a hand brushing a sleeve, a shadow crossing a face, the gentle rise and fall of conversation that, to anyone else, seemed ordinary. But to me, it was a map of intention, a chart of the unseen dynamics that controlled the room. I took a final sip of water, set the glass down with care, and let my eyes sweep across the room one more time, noting every flicker of expression, every unspoken word, every movement that carried hidden weight. And I knew that the moment would come when the calm patience I had maintained would become the leverage that changed everything. I watched from the doorway as Vanessa moved through the living room, her laughter light, almost musical, but layered with the precision of someone measuring every reaction. Michael followed, nodding at her suggestions, oblivious to the small cues I had already cataloged. I leaned against the wall, my hands folded calmly, observing how she positioned the furniture, how she subtly redirected conversations to topics that excluded me, how she inserted her opinions in ways that left Michael agreeing without question. The air felt charged, as if the room itself held its breath while I mapped the hidden currents of influence around me. I remembered the subtle shifts over the past months. Invitations that arrived only when I was occupied, casual remarks meant to undermine my plans, the faint tension whenever I spoke up, quickly smoothed over by Vanessa's practiced charm. I reminded myself of the quiet power of patience, that every observation I made now would later form the foundation of understanding, that the smallest gestures could reveal the largest truths. I moved toward the bookshelf, pretending to adjust a photograph, but my eyes never left the two of them, noting every micro-expression, every slight hesitation, every flicker of emotion that Vanessa tried to hide. Michael laughed at a joke, the sound warm, but his eyes flicked momentarily toward me, a brief recognition of my presence before returning to Vanessa. I allowed myself a slow exhale, the rhythm steady, the mind alert, calculating, and storing each detail. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, highlighting the lines on my hands, the quiet gray in my hair, and I felt the weight of experience grounding me, the knowledge that I had endured, observed, and survived far more subtle manipulations than this. I watched as Vanessa handed Michael a stack of papers, her eyes meeting mine just for a moment, a faint challenge that I did not acknowledge outwardly, only inwardly cataloging the intention behind the glance. I straightened the edge of the rug, shifted a vase slightly, movements small but deliberate, a reminder to myself that composure was the best disguise for awareness. The scent of roasting chicken lingered, mingling with the floral centerpiece, grounding the moment in normalcy while tension quietly rippled beneath the surface. I thought of the friend who had warned me to watch, to note, to understand, and I smiled faintly at the foresight now proven true. Every word exchanged, every step taken by Vanessa, became part of the silent record I was creating, a ledger of intention and influence that would later clarify the truth hidden in the smiles and nods. The conversation turned to holiday plans, and I noted how she subtly shifted the focus to distant relatives, bypassing me entirely, yet I remained still, patient, my attention acute. I felt the quiet power of presence, the assurance that awareness could surpass authority, that observation could reveal what charms sought to conceal. And as they continued their dialogue, I realized the first move I had chosen was patience, the second would be precision, and the third, when it came, would change the room entirely. I stepped away from the dining area and moved toward the living room, my mind tracing the patterns that had become impossible to ignore. Each smile Vanessa offered, each polite word, and every gentle gesture toward Michael now carried a hidden edge, a subtle manipulation that I had only begun to recognize. I recalled the holidays where I had prepared carefully for family gatherings, only to find myself seated at the periphery, watching as she subtly redirected attention away from me, her influence shaping every detail without anyone noticing. I remembered birthdays that had been rescheduled, outings mysteriously canceled, and gifts that were quietly misdirected, small acts that built a quiet wall between us over time. My eyes scanned the room, noting the positioning of chairs, the way she adjusted the tablecloth just so, the slight nod she gave Michael before speaking, all gestures that communicated authority and control without words. I let my gaze drift to the window where the afternoon sunlight hit the floor in warm rectangles, a stark contrast to the tension that filled the air. I reminded myself that calm observation was a tool as sharp as any argument, that patience would allow me to see the full picture before any move was made. The gentle hum of conversation from the guests provided a background rhythm, masking the careful scrutiny I was conducting, each moment catalogued silently in my mind. I thought of the times I had been supportive, helping Michael with decisions, offering guidance, believing that trust and love were enough to maintain balance, only to realize that some actions were calculated to shift power and influence. I felt the quiet weight of understanding settle over me, a clarity that was both sobering and empowering, knowing that I now held the insight to act when the moment was right. Every gesture Vanessa made, every subtle shift of her expression, became a piece of evidence, each one connecting to the next in a web of intention I could now see clearly. I straightened a cushion on the sofa, my hands steady, a small, deliberate action that belied the tension in my mind, reinforcing my composure as I prepared for the eventual moment when knowledge and timing would intersect to shift the balance in my favor. The aroma of dinner still lingered, comforting in its normalcy, but beneath it, the undercurrent of awareness pulsed steadily, a reminder that every small act of observation was shaping the path ahead, guiding me toward the first precise step in a strategy that had been forming quietly in the silence of my attentiveness. I noticed a quiet shift in the room as Vanessa laughed at a comment from one of the guests, her smile smooth, measured, the kind that hides intention beneath charm. Michael, completely absorbed, nodded along, unaware of the careful scrutiny I applied to every detail. I moved slowly to the sideboard, arranging a small tray of glasses, each motion deliberate, steady, unhurried, as though the act itself were ordinary, while my mind catalogued every micro-expression and subtle gesture. I recalled the past months, each event, each minor slight that had accumulated to this moment, the casual exclusions, the suggestions phrased as helpful but designed to manipulate, the slight redirection of conversations away from me. A friend had mentioned her tendencies long ago, warning me to watch, to notice, to trust my instincts, and now each memory aligned into a clear pattern, confirming my observations. I adjusted the napkin on the tray, a small, careful movement, letting my eyes track Vanessa as she continued her performance, noting the way she glanced toward Michael and back at me with a faint, fleeting awareness of my presence. I took a slow breath, letting the rhythm of the house, the sound of conversation, and the occasional clink of silverware anchor me, reinforcing my patience and focus. The air felt heavy with expectation, though no one else seemed to sense it, a tension hidden beneath the ordinary flow of the evening. Each subtle act, each orchestrated smile, and gentle word became a piece of evidence, a map of influence I had long suspected but now understood with precision. I walked toward the window to adjust the curtains slightly, the sunlight falling in clean lines across the floor, highlighting the stillness of my observation, the calmness that masked the growing awareness in my mind. Every minute gesture, every careful word, was stored silently, building the foundation for the moment when I would act with precision. I remembered the times I had tried to smooth interactions, to maintain harmony, to believe in goodwill, and I felt a quiet resolve, knowing that the combination of awareness, patience, and timing would give me the advantage. I straightened a vase, noticing how Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me and quickly away, registering the recognition that she was not fully in control. I allowed a faint, subtle smile, one of understanding and quiet power, acknowledging to myself that the moment of revelation was approaching, that the careful observation, the cataloging of actions, and the restraint I had maintained would converge to shift the balance of awareness, giving me clarity and influence in a space where charm and manipulation had so far gone unnoticed by everyone else. I moved back to the dining area, a tray of refreshments in my hands, and let my eyes roam over the guests, making mental notes of every small reaction, every shift in posture, every fleeting glance. Vanessa continued her performance with Michael, her laughter light, her gestures measured, yet I observed closely the subtleties of intention behind them, the patterns I had cataloged over the past weeks now forming a complete map in my mind. I remembered quiet evenings when she subtly redirected conversations, when invitations were carefully timed to exclude me, when remarks appeared casual but were strategically crafted to undermine my presence, and each recollection reinforced the clarity I had gained. I placed the tray on the sideboard, arranging glasses with deliberate care, letting my movements seem ordinary while my attention captured every nuance of interaction around me. The sunlight falling through the blinds created long, warm stripes across the polished floor, casting shadows that shifted subtly with each movement, a silent reflection of the shifting dynamics in the room. I thought back to family gatherings where my presence had been minimized, where my contributions were quietly overlooked, and I felt the quiet resolve within me strengthen, a patient determination that would guide my actions when the moment was right. I watched Vanessa engage with Michael, noting how she leaned slightly closer, how she adjusted her smile just so, how her hand rested on his arm with a calculated ease, all evidence of the subtle control she wielded, control I had begun to recognize and understand. I moved slightly, adjusting a cushion on a chair, a small motion that was both mundane and intentional, a reminder to myself of the quiet power of observation. The conversation turned to plans for the coming weeks, and I noted how Vanessa guided the dialogue, excluding me from influence while appearing considerate, every word carefully chosen, every suggestion layered with intent. I took a slow, controlled breath, the rhythm steady, allowing the normal sounds of the gathering, the clinking of silverware, the murmurs of conversation, the soft laughter, to blend into the background, while my mind remained sharply focused, cataloging, interpreting, and preparing. I reminded myself that patience and attention to detail were my allies, that by maintaining calm and recording these subtleties, I held an advantage unseen by anyone else in the room, that the quiet accumulation of understanding would eventually lead to the precise moment where awareness and action intersect, and that the balance of the evening, the perceptions of power and control, would ultimately shift in ways that only I could orchestrate. I watched the room carefully, every detail noted, every gesture stored in my memory. Vanessa continued to navigate the guests with effortless charm, her laughter floating above the soft background music, yet I could see the precision behind each movement, the subtle nudges that directed attention away from me, the small, calculated corrections she made to the flow of conversation. Michael nodded along, seemingly unaware of the intricate orchestration, absorbed in the image of harmony Vanessa carefully maintained. I moved closer to the center of the room, adjusting a small centerpiece as if by chance, my eyes never leaving the pair, noting how she leaned slightly toward Michael, her expressions measured, controlled, each smile perfectly timed to influence. My mind replayed past events, recalling the quiet exclusions, the last-minute schedule changes, the careful steering of conversations, all details that now formed a clear pattern of intent. I took a steady breath, allowing the normal sounds of the gathering, the gentle clink of glasses, the hum of polite conversation, the soft laughter, to fill the room, while internally cataloging the dynamics of influence. I remembered the subtle hints from friends, the quiet suggestions to observe carefully, to trust my instincts, and now each element fell into place, confirming the manipulation I had long suspected. I walked slowly along the side of the room, placing a hand on the back of a chair, maintaining outward calm while my mind traced the network of control Vanessa wielded. I noted the shifts in posture, the fleeting glances, the small adjustments to gestures, all silently communicating intention. I allowed a faint, private smile as I considered the advantage I held through observation alone, patience, and understanding. Each minor action became a part of a larger picture. Each reaction recorded and understood, the quiet accumulation of knowledge forming a foundation for the moment I would move. I straightened a napkin on the table and lightly tapped it, pretending to fidget, while my eyes captured the nuance of interaction around me. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, illuminating the polished wood floors, creating long lines of light that mirrored the subtle shifts and undercurrents in the room. I reminded myself of the quiet power inherent in awareness, that observation without immediate reaction could shape outcomes more effectively than confrontation. I watched as Vanessa continued her careful performance, smiling and adjusting, unaware that every subtle move was cataloged, every carefully orchestrated word noted. I felt the quiet anticipation build, knowing that this accumulation of detail, patience, and observation would soon converge, giving me a precise understanding of the dynamics at play and the leverage to act when the moment was right, leaving no ambiguity about the insight I had gained into the true nature of control and influence in the space around me. I felt the evening shift subtly as the sun dipped lower, the golden light spilling across the polished hardwood, illuminating the careful arrangements of the room, yet highlighting the tension that remained just beneath the surface. Vanessa continued her poised interactions with Michael, her gestures smooth, her words calculated to charm and influence, and I noted every subtle inflection, every glance, every micro-expression that revealed the careful orchestration behind her demeanor. I moved toward the side table, adjusting a small vase with deliberate care, each motion seemingly innocuous, yet allowing me to position myself to observe unobstructed. The hum of conversation and soft laughter filled the space, masking the undercurrent of scrutiny I maintained, each detail recorded silently in my mind. I recalled earlier events, the invitations timed inconveniently, the casual redirections, the polite exclusions that were now recognizable as part of a long pattern of influence. Each recollection strengthened my awareness. Each memory sharpened my focus, reinforcing the quiet patience I had maintained throughout the evening. I poured a glass of water and sipped slowly, letting the cool liquid steady my mind, reminding myself that calm observation was the strongest form of control, that awareness alone provided leverage, and that every subtle gesture Vanessa made contributed to the larger map I had been tracing in silence. I glanced around the room, noting the positioning of chairs, the flow of conversation, the slight hesitations, the timing of smiles, all of which revealed intent when seen through the lens of careful observation. I let my eyes rest momentarily on Michael, who continued to be unaware, nodding and responding to Vanessa's cues, absorbed in her performance, while I cataloged each detail with precision, each one forming a foundation for the eventual shift in dynamics that I could anticipate. The room was warm with the scent of dinner, the delicate aroma of flowers, and the soft background music, yet beneath it, the currents of control and subtle influence were clear to me, forming a map of relationships and intentions invisible to anyone else. I allowed a quiet, satisfied smile, recognizing that the patience and attention I had maintained had brought clarity, that each moment of silent scrutiny had strengthened my understanding, and that soon the careful accumulation of knowledge would allow me to act with precision, leveraging awareness over charm, patience over manipulation, and understanding over assumption, setting the stage for the pivotal moment when the subtle currents of influence would become visible to everyone in the room. I felt the culmination of the evening approach as Vanessa excused herself to attend to a phone call, leaving Michael momentarily attentive to the room. I moved closer to the center, my steps deliberate, hands steady, observing the subtle shift in energy that her absence created. The air seemed charged with expectation, the quiet hum of conversation now underscored by a tension I alone could perceive. I reflected on the weeks and months of careful observation, the incremental patterns of exclusion, the gestures, and words that revealed intent, all coalescing into a clear understanding of her influence and control. I adjusted a chair, placed a glass with deliberate precision, and allowed a small, internal smile as I acknowledged the advantage patience had given me, the clarity that now guided every thought and potential move. Michael spoke casually, unaware of the scrutiny that had silently built around him, nodding at my words and mine at his, maintaining a surface of ordinary conversation while beneath it, a careful assessment of character, intent, and influence unfolded. The sunlight through the window painted long streaks across the floor, casting shadows that mirrored the subtle dynamics in play, highlighting the quiet contrast between what was seen and what was understood. I took a slow breath, steady and controlled, letting the rhythm of the house, the scent of dinner lingering in the air, and the soft chatter of guests ground me in the moment while my mind mapped the interplay of actions and reactions. Every micro-expression, every fleeting glance, every measured gesture Vanessa had employed was cataloged, stored, and understood, forming the basis of insight I had patiently accumulated. I allowed myself to move the napkin on the table, a small, innocuous action, while my attention captured the nuance of the space, the subtle realignment of influence now evident. The quiet strength of presence, the calm patience, and the careful observation had brought me to this point, the understanding that leverage was not gained through confrontation but through awareness and timing. I felt the anticipation build, knowing the precise moment to act or reveal understanding would soon arrive, and that the quiet control I had maintained would allow me to navigate the remainder of the evening with clarity and influence, leaving no doubt about the insight I held and the careful, deliberate power of observation I had exercised throughout every detail, every gesture, and every interaction within the room.